Miranda, thanks for joining us. Right off the top, I'm gonna suck up a little bit. I think you and your Post colleagues deserve like 10 years of retroactive Pulitzer prizes, since the Pulitzer was rewarded for all those Russia collusion stories that didn't have any basis in reality. And your story is suddenly being confirmed everywhere. What do you attribute the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS, ABC, CNN, NBC to suddenly deciding after 18 months, oh, this story's kind of a big deal and the laptop is real? Why is it happening now?
Hi, Clay Buck. Look, I think it's pretty clear that the U.S. attorney in Delaware, which has been investigating Hunter Biden for tax evasion and money laundering and violations of the Foreign Agent Registration Act, pretty hefty crimes if they were committed. Those are pretty hefty allegations. And they've been investigating him since 2018, and it looks as if it may be coming to fruition fairly soon. We know now that Hunter Biden's business partners have gone or have been subpoenaed and appeared. We know Devon Archer, one of his former business partners, testified and handed over documents. And we know that his baby mama and another ex-girlfriend also appeared. So all of that put together, I think, is making the rest of the media that ignored our story for the last 18 months realize that they don't want to blindside their audiences, that they need to actually soften them up and prepare them for what may be coming down the pike. And that's the only reason. They're still running interference for Joe Biden. Both CNN and the Washington Post, you could have almost identical sort of disclaimers in their stories in the last 2 days saying there's no evidence that Joe Biden was involved, which is ridiculous because we know Washington Post has the laptop, it has possession of the laptop, and there's plenty of evidence there.
Well, Miranda, I wanted to ask you specifically about that. You know, we mentioned the last hour, when we brought you on, we'd posed to you, to put it in shorthand, the 10% for the big guy line. A lot of people know that one from Hunter's communications about kicking money off to Joe Biden. What is, I mean, to the extent that we have information, evidence already, what is there at least pointing in the direction of a real financial connection, not just to Hunter Biden, we know about that, but to Joe Biden himself?
Well, let's just start very basically. Joe Biden lied to the American people. That is a fact, and it is proven by the evidence, because he said before the election several times to the media, he said, I know nothing about my son Hunter's overseas business dealings. He hadn't met with any of Hunter's partners, so-called. Yet there is so much evidence of all the partners that he met from all over the world. He met them in Beijing, he met them in Washington, D.C. So that's a lie. Then you come to the financial entanglements. We know, and it's circumstantial, we know that that Hunter Biden complained bitterly about having to give what he said was half his salary to his father. We know that there are emails there showing that a part of one Chinese deal, where 10% was going to the big guy. We know from Tony Bobolinsky, who is one of Hunter's former business partners, who gave a press conference before the election campaign that was ignored by that section of the media. We know that he has said that Joe Biden is the big guy. That was the way Hunter described his father. They sort of spoke in code about Joe Biden, but he was the big guy. He was my chairman, Hunter called him. And Joe was told about all these deals. He knew about them. Hunter was in contact with him every day. And so that's that. And then we also know that there was some mingling of finances. So, shared debit cards, shared bank accounts. This is from Hunter's own words on the laptop. And also there is an email from one of Hunter's business partners, a guy who used to run all his, the details of his life, basically, because Hunter was a crack addict. And this guy, Eric Schwerin, talks about taking money out of an account, like a special account of Hunter's, to pay for Joe Biden's maintenance and upkeep and renovations on his house. This was, $10,000 here, $2,000 there, not huge amounts of money, but also paying an AT&T phone bill every month. Hunter was paying one of Joe's phone bills. So that's the tip of the iceberg. I think that's all the evidence that we have, but it's enough. It shows that there is money going from Hunter to Joe, that Joe was being talked about as getting cuts of deals, and that they had commingled finances. I mean, what more do you need?
Miranda, all this detail is great, and I know you've been covering this story now for a long time. Couple of questions. Do we know if Tony Bobulinski has been called by the grand jury to testify in the Hunter Biden investigation? Second part of this question.
I can't answer that.
We don't know. Do you know the answer to that one?
I do.
Has he testified?
I can't answer that.
Well, that is intriguing. All right. So second part of this, if Tony Bobulinski is testifying, and even if he does not, what you mentioned as it pertains to Joe Biden is he's lied. He certainly lied to the American public. Lying to the American public is not a crime, right?
No.
But if Joe Biden were called to testify as a witness in this Hunter Biden grand jury investigation, he would be put under oath and he would be asked about all of these emails, the big guy emails, the commingling of the finances, potentially meeting some of these business partners with Chinese interest and Ukrainian interest. Do we think that Joe Biden might be subpoenaed himself as a witness in the Hunter Biden investigation? Have you heard any intimation that that might occur?
No, I haven't. I mean, all I know is that the Republicans are talking about investigating this and, using the laptop as a roadmap. And I know I spoke to Ron Johnson yesterday. He talks about he and Chuck Grassley did incredible work. The laptop's not enough. You need also the information that Tony Bobulinski handed over to the FBI, his testimony, but also what Ron Johnson, Chuck Grassley did. Now, that's what the Republicans will do. They will build on already an immense amount of very useful financial information, tracking the money for some of these deals. And Ron Johnson told me yesterday that the obstruction from the Democrats was one thing, calling it Russian disinformation, accusing him and Grassley of being Kremlin stooges, organizing these fake FBI briefings and then leaking to the press. That's bad enough. But really what stymied their investigation when the Republicans had control was their own Republican senators who got squeamish, thought that the investigation into Hunter Biden was too political. Who knows what relationships they had. Maybe they felt sorry for Joe Biden. They were friendly with him. He used to be a senator. But Mitt Romney and Rob Portman, both Republican senators, just refused to go along with some of these subpoenas that Ron Johnson wanted to. Ron Johnson wanted to subpoena Hunter Biden and Devon Archer and these people. So if the Republicans themselves do not hold together as a team after the midterms, then forget about it. This is the problem. You have Republicans who are squeamish in that party and for whatever reason are helping to protect Joe Biden. And it's just not right. And if they hadn't obstructed their own comrade in Ron Johnson, then these stories about Joe Biden would have already come on the public record and, history would have been changed. Joe Biden probably wouldn't be president today.
Miranda, first of all, everyone should go get the book, Laptop from Hell, Miranda Devine's book that's out now, been out for a while. Where do you see all of this going? What can you tell us about what you're expecting in the weeks ahead? Because I know some people who saw the laptop hard drive mirror in the early days who are telling me now there's a lot more coming.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure there's a lot more in the laptop.
No, I mean about the Hunter Biden case in general.
Yeah. No, well, so Hunter Biden, I guess the most likely thing is that there will be indictments coming out of that grand jury of Hunter Biden. Also, I'm told that half the focus of the questioning from that grand jury has been on Blue Star Strategies, which is that Democratic lobbying firm, which was basically dragged in by Hunter and Devon Archer into their Burisma dealings, that corrupt Ukrainian energy company. Blue Star Strategies was doing some lobbying on behalf of Burisma, allegedly, and that would put them in violation of this FARA Act, which is foreign agent registration. You're supposed to register as a foreign agent if you're doing lobbying for overseas companies. And this is, a little used crime until the Trump world started being weaponized against Trump world. And you had Paul Manafort, who was part of Trump's campaign, went to jail over it. And another guy, Tom Barrack, there are some allegations there. He's been caught up in some investigation to do with FARA. And they're even, FARA is being weaponized against Rudy Giuliani. So this is now regarded as a serious crime with serious penalties. So Blue Star Strategies, there are allegations about that. So I think something momentous will come out of that grand jury. Who knows when, but certainly they've been hearing testimony from Hunter's partners since at least last summer.
Miranda, Buck and I have a stake bet on this, and I think
she
he's
already
getting
weighed in.
increasingly
She thinks it's happening.
nervous.
She's going to be sitting across
I just want to make this clear. I'm betting a stake that he will get indicted. Buck doesn't think he will. Would you take my side or Buck's side of the bet here?
Well, I would take your side only because I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming, and I think there's so much, people looking at this story that it would be such a terrible blow to the kind of reputation of the U.S. attorney in Delaware that I'm not sure that they're going to let Hunter off the hook. But I think what might happen is that Blue Star Strategies might, take precedence and take up a lot of the media time. And maybe Hunter will get, lesser charges. I mean, there's talk of, in the New York Times, in fact, where they rehearsed his defense, there was talk of downgrading criminal charges for FARA to civil charges if he sort of registered retroactively.
Just to be clear, our bet is that it has to be criminal charges there, Miranda. So we'll see. Yes. I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I'm sitting on the fence here then, in that case. Who knows? I mean, other people, he borrowed $1 million from some generous benefactor to pay his taxes, but he did it after the investigation had started. And with mere mortals like you and me, if we do that, it doesn't get us off the hook.
Does not indeed. That's true. All right, Miranda, thanks so much. Laptop from Hell is the book, everybody. Go check it out. Thanks, Miranda.
She and her compatriots, you guys deserve 10 Pulitzers.
We have our friend with us now, Mr. Gordon Chang. He's the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, and you can follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Clay and Buck.
So let's start with the situation of the lockdown in Shanghai and COVID in China, because we're starting to hear rumblings here, Gordon, about the BA2, I think it is, subvariant of COVID. But in China, they're still in, well, give us an overview. We don't hear much about what their policies really are with regard to COVID. Are they still doing zero COVID? They're still doing lockdowns. What's going on over there?
Yeah, they're still doing zero COVID because Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is said to be behind it. And this really means that China is not trying to live with the disease, but to prevent every instance of it. They've got COVID outbreaks, as you mentioned, of the Omicron BA2 variant all across the country, from Jilin province, especially in the northeast, but also in places like Shenzhen in the south. And most notably now, Shanghai, which is under a two-part citywide lockdown. That's 25.1 million people in two separate phases are going through each person 2 sets of COVID tests. And this means public transportation is locked down. People can't go to work. This is really disrupting society across China. One thing that's important is that regardless of what you think about vaccines, China has no effective vaccine against Omicron. And so therefore its only defense is isolation, which means they shut down every place that there is a single case.
Gordon, appreciate you joining us. One of China's big stories that they've been trying to spread is look at how well we have handled COVID compared to the Western democracies in particular. They've used that as a valedictory for their system of government. Given that they're one of the last places, if not the last place in the world to still be following the zero COVID policy or COVID zero policy, what sort of risk do they have going forward? Because as you mentioned, they don't have a lot of natural immunity. They don't have a particularly effective vaccine. It seems like based on every other country in the world, it is virtually impossible to stop the most recent variants from spreading. What could this do to the legitimacy of the Chinese government, and what struggles and challenges could it bring to bear?
Well, Clay, you raise a critical point that most everybody forgets, and that is if we go back to February of 2020, Beijing started to propagate the narrative that the failure of the West, especially the United States, to contain COVID was an indication that democracy did not work. And they pointed to their own system as being able to control COVID to show that communism was superior. So every COVID case is a threat to the legitimacy of the Communist Party. And that's why, for instance, from January 2021 to last month, they didn't report a single COVID death in China. They reported 2 in Jilin province. Obviously, there's a lot more. But, you know, it's a bigger threat than just legitimacy, and that is COVID, because they believe in isolation, because they're trying to prevent every single case, means that they're taking these draconian measures, which are undermining an already weak economy, and they're convincing a lot of companies that they have to have a more resilient supply chain, not just based in China. They need other factories elsewhere. And this is not going to be good for China in the long run because it means that their economy is going to suffer. Some people say they're taking a $46 billion a month hit to their gross domestic product. $46 billion each month.
Speaking to Gordon Chang, he is the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, at Gordon G. Chang on Twitter, if you want to give him a follow for more analysis. Gordon, what have we seen in terms of China's response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine? In the early days, there was a lot of chatter about China getting pushed much closer into the Russian orbit, perhaps picking up some of the economic slack, so to speak, of the sanctions that would have been hitting Russia and hitting Russian energy. What has China done, and how are they positioning themselves vis-a-vis this conflict that's really consuming the West right now?
Yeah. China is supporting Vladimir Putin to the hilt, and it's not just elevated commodity purchases, which is financing directly Putin's war, but it's also China's put its diplomats at the service of Russia. China's big propaganda machines amplify these ludicrous Russian narratives, and China is making its financial system available to Russian institutions that have been sanctioned by the West. We kick them off SWIFT. They can then go on the Chinese version of SWIFT, which is CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. There has been a lot of talk that Sinopec, which is a large state-owned enterprise, pulled out of a potential gas deal with Sibur, a large Russian oil and gas company. But I don't think sanctions were the issue for that because Sinopec still has another ongoing deal with that same Russian entity. So really, Beijing is just trying to play it both ways. And unfortunately, the Biden administration is not sanctioning them because we know that China is supporting Russia to the hilt.
Gordon, what lessons, if any, has China taken from the failure of Russia to rapidly conquer Ukraine? In particular, certainly I would think, and I've read some of these things, I'm curious if you agree, that the Taiwanese people have been emboldened by the resistance that Ukraine has shown to Russia and believe that despite the vast superiority of the Chinese military, that Taiwan might be able to hold out in a similar fashion, particularly because, unlike in Ukraine, they have roughly 100 miles of open water that would theoretically provide some barrier of protection, make it more difficult to provide support for any invading forces. What lessons do you think China and Taiwan have taken from what we've seen happen in Ukraine with the Russian forces, if any?
There's a lot going on there. And, of course, the failure of the Russian military to meet expectations has given people in Taiwan some hope. But also it's encouraged people in Taiwan to take care of their own defense, that they can't rely on the United States. And as a side note, Taiwan has a lot of mountains. It is really good territory for defenders. But, there's a lot of lessons in general that China and Taiwan have taken away from what's happened in Ukraine. One of them is the massive failure of deterrence, a big failure of Biden foreign policy. And the other thing, though, I think that China is looking at is that the invasion really accelerated deglobalization. Deglobalization, the biggest victim is going to be China. That means China is, if anything, going to accelerate its invasion plans. I don't expect it this year because they've got a leadership contest going on. But once they settle that, if they do, but once they settle that, then I think that Taiwan's really at risk.
Speaking of Gordon Chang, author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War. And Gordon, what has North Korea been up to? We're starting to see more reporting about North Korea, and perhaps this is just a function of Kim Jong-un recognizing that the world's attention has turned to foreign policy and national security, so he's going to act out in some way. What's the latest? There was a test. It wasn't really a test. What's going on here?
Well, they did test an intercontinental ballistic missile that has a range to hit the U.S. There is some controversy among missile geeks whether it was a Hwasong-15, which North Korea tested in November 2017, or whether it was a new version, the Hwasong-17. But whatever it was, it is able to hit the U.S. Also, they've been testing this year hypersonic glide vehicles. Now, here, this is absolutely fascinating. This is very advanced technology, and the least likely explanation is that the North Koreans developed this on their own. They probably got this from China because their HGV, as it's called, looks just like the Chinese one, and the Biden administration has yet to say anything about this, which means that Kim Jong-un sees a big green light. So here again, we've got more failure on the part of the White House. And by the way, it's not so much the Biden failure, it's also a Trump failure because the North Koreans were obviously developing these missiles during North Korea's self-proclaimed moratorium. We should have been sanctioning China and Russia and North Korea during that time, but we didn't.
Gordon, I read an interesting piece, and I'm curious if you agree with it, and I know you've written a lot about this in your book, that what we're really seeing is not the rise of China, but China recognizing that its overall might has reached its apex. And so they are, because of the population declines, which almost no one is talking about, the one China policy, they can't get people to have 2 and 3 kids no matter what they're doing. Instead of recognizing and believing that China is at its apex and is only going to is continuing to climb, do you think Chinese power has reached its apex?
I do. I might be the worst person in the world to ask this because I felt the Communist Party wouldn't survive by now. But nonetheless, when you look at demography, this is the steepest demographic decline in history in the absence of war or disease that China is going to face. They're going to lose, according to 2 Chinese demographers who published a study last fall, they're going to lose half of their population in 45 years. You do a little arithmetic, it means that China is maybe 1/3 as populous by the turn of the century. In other words, it's about the same number of people in China as in the United States. No society has ever.
That's wild, by the way. No one else even talks about this hardly. I read the same sort of studies that you have. Will you just repeat that again? Because I think there's this idea out there, because there's 1.3 billion people in China or whatever it is, that their population and influence is going to continue to grow. But if you look at the one China policy, what did you just say? Because I think a lot of people are, it's a jaw-dropping statistic.
Yeah, 2 Chinese demographers from Xi'an, which is central China, published a study which they believe that China will lose 1/2 of their population in 45 years. That's basically 2065. And you start to, you start to do some of the arithmetic. You look at the statistics, and China's population statistics are overstated. But you start looking at these things, and the decline could even be greater than that. No society has ever gone through that before. We don't know how China will be able to do it. And as you point out, although China went from a 1-child policy at the end of 2015 to a 3-child policy now, people don't want to procreate. The Communist Party Youth League published, this is official, by the way, published a study which showed that 44% of urban Chinese women do not want to get married. The reason why that's significant is you can't get a birth permit in China unless you are married, which means that essentially half of the urban women have taken themselves out of the procreation pool. And this really points to a dramatic decline in population. China, his foreign policy is dependent on intimidating others. You can't intimidate others if your country is falling apart.
Gordon Chang, everybody. Follow him at Gordon G. Chang on Twitter. And check out the great U.S.-China tech war and also the coming collapse of China. Gordon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Clay and Buck. I really appreciate it.
We've got our friend Alex Berenson with us now, author of the excellent book on the COVID lockdowns and all the rest of it, Pandemia. Get your copy today. Also, subscribe to his Substack. I subscribe, Clay subscribes, and you can't get him on Twitter because he's still banned, although we'll see where that goes. Alex, thanks for being back.
You guys just stepped on my April Fool's Day joke. I was gonna say that Twitter had let me back on. But no,
I don't know if anybody would have believed it, though, Alex. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I'm not sure it would have. I'm not sure that one would have flown. So let's start with the macro. It's amazing because there's still COVID out there. There's the BA2 variant, but it feels like the Democrats don't have the same degree of political certainty about what they want to do. So there's a little less certainty about the science. I mean, what's going on right now? I mean, there's new shots, more shots. What's happening?
No, I mean, I think you're exactly correct. And I wrote a long piece on Substack about this yesterday. Actually, one of the longer pieces I've written in a while. Basically, politically, the Democrats thought for almost 2 years, certainly for all of 2020 and much of 2021, that this worked hugely to their advantage. That, not just with their base, but that with their, with the center, they were compassionate, and the Republicans were just a bunch of, jerks who didn't care whether grandma died. And I mean, none of that was true, but it was how they played it and how the media, allowed them to play it. And now that is just flown out the window. I mean, for two obvious reasons, right? First of all the solutions they proposed have failed, including the vaccines, right? I mean, everyone knows that the vaccines have not worked to end the epidemic. We can argue about whether or not they've reduced, serious cases and deaths, but they clearly haven't ended the epidemic. And that's after, 2 years in which school closures didn't end the epidemic and lockdowns didn't end the epidemic. And so they know politically it doesn't work. Plus, I mean, I know it's hard for people on the right to admit that people on the left are human beings, just like it's hard for people on the left to admit that people on the right are human beings, but we're all human beings. And a lot of those people are tired of this. And they see actually the harm it's done to their kids, the people who do have kids, and they want it to be over. And so, there's this hardcore, which now I'd say might be down to 10 or 15% of the population, and maybe, less than half of Democrats, that still isn't ready for it to be over. That either is still afraid, and, they're the ones who are whining about how they have some cousin who, has chronic fatigue and is going to get long COVID, and therefore the rest of us have to wear masks for eternity. Or they're epidemiologists who think that they can use COVID still to, remake society and, make America into a socialist paradise. But most Americans and even most Democrats don't believe any of that stuff anymore. And they do just want it to be over. So that's where we are politically. I'm sort of increasingly convinced of that. The problem is, and, for 2 years I've been saying to you, we've overstated the risks of this. And we shouldn't have taken the measures that we took. And I still believe all that is true, but there is something else happening medically that we need to talk about, which is that the virus hasn't gone away. And although Omicron is not very dangerous, and so even though a lot of people get infected, not that many people get really sick or die, we don't know what the next variant is going to look like. And that is just the sad truth. And we have vaccinated a huge number of people in the United States and in Western countries with these mRNA vaccines. And we don't really know what the long-term effects of that are going to be, either on the people who vaccinated or how they're going to drive viral evolution. So I'm not saying, by the way, we need to lock down tomorrow. We're not going to lock down again, period. Unless things get unthinkably bad, we're not going to do that again. What I am saying is everybody wants this to be over. And for 2 years, I've wanted it to be over. And what I'm warning people is, unfortunately, we can't say it's over, not medically, even if it's over politically.
Alex, it's interesting on this BA2 variant of the Omicron variant, however you want to classify it. It doesn't appear that there is much of a surge coming in the United States based on the data that I'm looking at. I would bet that you kind of feel the same way. Are we attributing that now to Omicron, the first version, having swept so thoroughly through the United States that while there is talk about the impact of the vaccine, that the reality is almost everybody at this point either has gotten COVID or has some antibodies to COVID through the vaccine or some different variation of it? Buck and I both had the Omicron version. I imagine a huge percentage of the people listening to us right now did as well. Is that really what you think we're seeing, why there's not much of an increase in the overall cases with this BA2 starting to roll through the United States?
I'm not sure that that's right. Here's why. In Europe, they had tremendous surges in the original Omicron in December and January, and they're having tremendous caseloads. So some countries are, some countries aren't now. The UK is having tremendous caseloads now. So here's what I think. I mean, I think A, it may be a little bit early to say for sure. B, this is traditionally. I mean, we only have 3 years of data, but this is sort of, we're heading into the season now when COVID is at its lowest in the U.S., right? The sort of the spring shoulder season. And 3, I think the U.S. has a lot of natural immunity. Natural immunity is clearly more protective than vaccine immunity, and the U.S. had more cases, right? We didn't lock down as hard as Germany or Europe, much less a place like South Africa. So I think we have a lot of people with what you could call quote unquote real immunity, and that may combine with the Omicron wave of the winter to give us better protection. But, we'll see in 2 months where we stand. But by the way, I'm not worried about BA2. I'm worried about the next one. And there will be a next one. There has been a different variant really every 6 months from the winter of 2021. And so come, I don't want to make an exact prediction, but come May or June or July, there'll be a next variant. Hopefully that next variant will be even less dangerous to people than Omicron. But hopefully doesn't mean it's going to be that way necessarily.
Alex Berenson, everybody, Pandemia is the book. Subscribe to his Substack. Alex, the shots. We're now joking around on Twitter with, I'm sorry, not to rub salt in the wound, but some of us joke around on Twitter with other Team Reality folks about how, 3 shots, those are rookie numbers. You need 4 shots or 5 shots. And there does seem to just be this momentum, I guess, for now they're approving another round. But where are they in terms of actually aligning the shot to the currently circulating variant and having enough time to know if the aligned shot, assuming it's aligned, is even effective against the variant? And also about whether 3 or 4 or 10 shots are safe and have no problems. I mean, how does that all work?
They are nowhere, Buck. That's the short answer to that. They have been promising variant-specific boosters since 2020. They haven't managed to come up with one. This is another great lie of mRNA, that somehow mRNA is going to enable people to really quickly move and create a variant-specific booster that we can all have. They are always chasing the next variant, okay? It takes a little while to actually sequence it, and then it takes a little while to figure out if that one is going to take off in the wild. And basically, by the time it's too late. So on top of that, they haven't demonstrated to anybody's satisfaction, not even these, these sort of completely captured regulators in our FDA and CDC, that having variant-specific boosters makes any difference. So people continue to get the same vaccine that was developed in 2020 to a virus that essentially no longer exists. But here's what I'll say. They can tell, and we were joking about this on Twitter last year when I was allowed on Twitter, that, the 3 booster people were going to go shoot the 2 booster people and say, you're not really vaccinated, right? And it turned out that's true. Like, those people, now you're not fully vaccinated unless you have 3. Pretty soon you're not going to be fully vaccinated unless you have 4. But whatever the epidemiologists and the public health, nincompoops tell people, they're not listening anymore. Right now, only about 90 million people, and that sounds like a lot, only about 90 million people have gotten booster shots. That's out of more than 200 million who got the first 2 doses. And remember, those people are not vaccine hesitant. They're not the Neanderthals like me, right? They were happy or at least willing to get vaccinated. And they have looked at this ever since and said, you know what? No more. And it's not like a million people a day are lining up for boosters right now. Despite everything, despite every ad, despite all the public pressure, despite all the media pressure, despite all the corporate pressure, you know how many people are getting boosters in the United States these days? Fewer than 100,000 a day. The only thing that's piling up when it comes to vaccines is vaccines in freezers that the government is paying for by the billions. Those will never be used. That is my prediction. We will have hundreds of millions of vaccine doses that we're going to try to shove to some African country because they will never be used in the U.S.
Alex Berenson, fantastic work as always. Go read his Substack. Make sure you don't miss a moment. Have a good weekend, Alex. Thanks for making the time for us.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
You might find yourself turning on Fox News and seeing this guy as he will start off your days on Saturday and Sunday. He is Will Cain. He'll be there with you watching on Fox News. And, Will, I'll start you off here. It's Final Four weekend, and we predicted it. I don't know if we talked about this on the air. I don't think we have. Buck Sexton had never filled out an NCAA tournament bracket in his life. I don't know how that's possible, by the way, given that he knew you. At some point in time, I would have thought you would have set up some sort of raffle at the Blaze back in the day. But somehow we had never had Buck fill out a bracket. It looks like he's going to win the bracket challenge because he has Villanova.
Oh, yes.
Which is always the way it goes, right?
It is always the way it goes. Hey, Buck, how did you make it to this point in your life? Because I think it would have taken a proactive effort to avoid filling out a bracket.
So you guys have to understand something. There's America, and then there's growing up in New York City. College basketball in New York City is everyone here just cares about. Like, I grew up watching the Knicks and the Bulls and all that. College basketball in New York City is a fraction of the interest that it is elsewhere, because what are the teams generally in New York that people would get excited about?
Seton Hall, St. John's. Back in the day, these were New York City had that's the thing, and I'm sure this is exactly what you want to talk about on Clay and Buck today, but this is supposed to be the basketball mecca, is New York City, right? And there was a time when it felt like college basketball was also part of that. Now, I'll grant you, there's been a fall from grace collegiately and professionally for New York City as the basketball mecca, but I don't know, man. Even your high school, right? I don't know. I can't remember which high school you went to, but I just think amateur basketball would have been a thing that wrapped you up in the bracket.
No, it was big. My high school, Regis, Dr. Fauci, by the way, this is true. This is not a joke.
He played on the
it's not
team.
April Fool's.
Yeah.
He was the captain of the Regis team. He was 5'7".
Yeah.
Says something right there, right?
The Will, by the way, Buck has managed to avoid that, but we have been having fun with the woke bracket challenge, which it looks like it's going to end up Keith Olbermann versus Rex Chapman, and I think you would acknowledge now, Buck, that the sports media has totally, like, you've been blown away by how liberal the sports media is. Just started to do the show with me, right?
I have to put this to Will, because you guys have both worked in both sides of the media. News media, straight up doing news media stuff. I mean, Clay obviously now on this show, and Will, you and I worked together for years ago. And you've both been Will, you were at ESPN, so you really know what. Here's Clay's contention. Sports journalism is more woke and left-wing than political journalism. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I think so. It's definitely more monolithic, because outside of Clay and me, you really would have trouble pointing out open rebuttal to the orthodoxy of sports media. But, hey, so Outkick's got this woke March Madness bracket. Clay, I have a little bit of a problem with it, and the problem is, I think, with the voters. You've clearly identified some of the wokest members of sports media, but here's my contention. I was thinking about this. I think it was yesterday. I was voting in your poll. I don't think Olbermann gets to count, and I'm not sure Rex Chapman does. Now, here's why. Because I don't know that either of those, Rex may be, but I don't think Olbermann, is a true indoctrinated wokester. I think Olbermann is just nuts. I think he's just nuts. And Chapman may be as well. But, the Jamels of the world believe this woke ideology as a path to power or a path to what they consider to be social justice. I honestly, if you told me Oberman had a bunch of racist stuff in his background or he, whatever, I mean, I wouldn't be blown away. He's just nuts, and that's just the side of
there's an argument for that. We had to retire Jamel because I think Jamel would win Jamel Hill every year if we allowed her to appear in the bracket challenge. So whenever you win the woke bracket, you're retired, like you get hung up in the rafters. So Keith Olbermann and Rex Chapman, I think, are going to be the winners. Now, Rex is on the NCAA tournament coverage, so I think he would count. Olbermann, I do agree. I mean, do you think so too, Buck, that Olbermann is he's bona fide insane at this point?
No, I don't even engage with him on Twitter. I kind of worry about the guy. I mean, he's nasty. He's not a nice person. This is well known all throughout the business. So, but nonetheless, I mean, common human decency. You actually kind of hope the guy's okay. He's in a constant state of like frenzied rage meltdown.
Yeah, I don't think he even lives up to the idea of woke. I think he's just insane.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those examples, by the way, of what happens if you don't. What is he, like 55 or something? No family, no kids. He sits like kind of on Twitter and just throws out all sorts of outlandish comments. And speaking of outlandish, by the way, Will, we were talking earlier in the show about what's going on with Hunter Biden, right? And the way that all of a sudden the Hunter Biden story is legitimate to cover. Why do you think it's become legitimate to cover all, like New York Times is suddenly acknowledging it, Washington Post, CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC, they're all willing suddenly to talk about a laptop story that's 18 months old?
That really is a fascinating conversation. I don't know where you two landed on it earlier in the show. There is a school of thought out there that Joe Biden has outlived his usefulness to the Democratic Party or to the powers, the centers of power on the left, and now it becomes fine to do so. Or I guess the suppression of that story has already reaped the fruits of censoring it, and that is replacing the centers of power, getting Donald Trump out. I would pair it with, apparently there's this Vanity Fair story as well that goes into the lengths to which Dr. Fauci was in coordination with Peter Daszak to suppress the origins of COVID. And the first reaction that I had was, why is Vanity Fair doing that story? So, why all of a sudden there's what we would call mainstream media willing to address things they called conspiracies, I'm tempted to say 12 months ago. They're probably calling this stuff conspiracies a month ago, right? A month ago, or at the very least silence on it. I don't think the answer, Clay, is that it's become undeniable. I don't think that's the answer because it has been somewhat obvious to undeniable for quite some time. So the answer to why they're covering it now, it sounds more conspiratorial and maybe more nefarious. It's just not as easy as, well, the truth has finally come out.
Where do you come down, Will? Because we've been trying to do a little bit of wargaming, tea leaf reading, however somebody wants to put it. Clay is the Nostradamus of Nashville, I like to say. So we've been looking at this, where this heads with Joe Biden running again. If he doesn't run again, who would be the standard bearer? How would that play out? And also, if Hunter Biden faces criminal charges here, which I think he will just barely escape, Clay thinks he will be charged. Do you think that Joe Biden pardons or commutes the sentence of his son while he's president?
Well, I actually think I'm on your side, Buck, on that. I just don't find a really good historical example of someone in this situation being held accountable. So I don't have a lot of faith that even Joe Biden would be put in that position of having to pardon his son. I'll believe it when I see it, that there's some real day of accountability for Hunter Biden. And then as to what happens in the future, as to who runs, I think we have to say there's just zero chance at this point that Joe Biden is the nominee of the Democratic Party. I think it's zero. I don't see any way that they can put him up. And obviously they can't put Kamala up for president of the United States. So I don't know. What? Here's the question. How much power does a small radical minority continue to wield? That's it. Small radical minority seems to drive Disney to its knees. There's no way what Disney is doing is in line with its profit line, its bottom line, the vast majority of its customer base. It's just not. So willing to bend the knee to a small radical minority.
Okay, Will, can I ask you on that point, just are you at all surprised that, because it seemed like DeSantis passed this bill that bans indoctrination of children, truly children, kindergarten through third grade. The left says it's the Don't Say Gay bill. They create this big fight. They find out that not only the American people broadly speaking, with the bill in Florida. The residents of Florida who are Democrats by a 52% majority support it. And then Disney comes out all against it. And then Disney wokesters at the very top level are talking about their pansexual children. What is going on?
I can't explain what's going on with those employees, but I would say that Disney is just like, and maybe even more to an extent, every other corporation in America where they're terrified of their employees. And again, terrified of that small radical minority. They're not catering to their customer base. They're catering to some fear of being branded something transphobic, racist, whatever it may be, by this small percentage of their employee base. And then beyond that, whatever voices they hear on social media. And then therefore, to bring that back to Biden, is the Democratic Party going to go down the same path? Are they going to go down the path of Rashida Tlaib and AOC, which is the path to the wilderness, or when they decide or they have to move on from Joe Biden, do they get smart and go, you know what, maybe like a Joe Manchin type gives us our best chance at governing?
It's a great question, Will, and we'll talk about this maybe when we come back, and certainly it's going to be a conversation for months to come. I encourage everybody out there, by the way, to watch Fox and Friends with Will on Saturday. Pete Hegseth, Rachel Compost Duffy. I think you guys will enjoy that for sure. But is there – I think it's going to be Hillary, right? I mean, that's my prediction.
Oh, boy. Is that your Nostradamus, Nashville Nostradamus?
That's my Nostradamus prediction in terms of how it's going to play out. But my question is, Buck, and I think that's a good one too, is there a Barack Obama who could come up and steal the nomination from Hillary even though she is the preferred candidate, right? It seemed like Hillary was going to be the nominee in 2008. She ends up getting it yanked away from her by Obama. Obviously, Trump beats her in 2016. Is there somebody who can kind of come out of left field and be a fresh face to avoid Hillary getting the nomination in 2024? That, to me, is going to be an intriguing question. Will, thanks, my man. Have a good weekend.
Hey, can I say I just recorded a podcast with Piers Morgan. We debate COVID, masks, vaccines, gun control, and we agree on woke culture. You don't want to miss that as it drops on Monday on the Will Cain podcast.
Excellent.
Awesome. Good stuff. Check that out for sure.